everyone, and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
That's because we have the same first name.
That's right.
Now, of course, lately in the current events news, people have been protesting school shootings and gun violence everywhere. And I saw that you posted something that was kind of in a similar vein.
Yeah, look, I posted an open letter, I called it, just called a note to people that play and make video games or something to that effect. And it was kind of a letter saying, I think it would be nice for us. And I tried to carve out a day and a Saturday, so maybe it's a little bit easier for some people, or harder, depending on how you play video games, to try and celebrate a day without guns in video games. And I've been calling it a video game ceasefire, and it's on April 28th, 2018. And it's just kind of the letter says, and we can link to it on the site or whatever. The letter says that, we have 364 other days where we lock and load. And why don't we just take a single day to say, hey, maybe these things that we play with, even virtually, are really serious to people who have been victims of gun violence, and that is directly victims or their families, especially in America, because people know what a hard time we have getting anything done here. It's an idea that I figured anybody in the mainstream that catches it, I'm only going to catch ire for, but I don't know. What are your feelings on something like this?
It reminds me of the Christmas Eve in World War I, where on the Russian lines, where they just stopped fighting for the evening and exchanged presents, and then they got back to killing each other the next morning. But it was just, a time where they had a moment of camaraderie, of humanity between them all. You know what?
It's amazing you said that, because that was literally in my mind the whole time of I know, and I asked for some feedback from different people. One of the people that got back to me was Chris Plant of Polygon. He was kind of telling me that something to the effect of he didn't love that the letter kind of seemed like it was okay to use guns the other 364 days. And I think I a little bit personally agree that I feel like I went a little too down the middle on this one, whereas my personal stance is more on the side of not being super violent in video games. But I've played them in the past. Far Cry 5, people either love it or they hate it. The people that love it are loving it probably because the gun stuff that's in there, right? So it's a hard thing to reckon with. How many games are you playing lately that are primarily the verb is shoot these days, right?
Not as many as I was in high school, but yeah, still quite a few.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know if it's age or what, but it's almost like I've become bored of, I don't get excited for gun animations or anything like that. But hey, maybe we'll, I've pitched violent video games on this show. I'm sure it's not going to be my last one.
I think if you want that spark of life reinvigorated in your love of guns, then pick up John Woo's Stranglehold on the Xbox 360.
That is a great game.
I've compiled a great video on YouTube of some of my highlights from my gaming session, which I recorded. But it very early on in the game gives you the ability to slow time almost to like an absolute standstill and zoom in very close on where you're shooting, so you can really kind of precisely shoot various spots on the enemy. And then it just kind of lingers on the enemy after they get shot and react to it for a little while, which sounds really sadistic.
Yeah, well, it's the
but
Sniper
it's quite
Elite
fun when you end up shooting them in the crotch and dozens of guys in every map. You just think the cops coming through afterwards being like, what kind of sicko are we dealing with here?
But think about that, right? That game, and I know the video you're referring to, it's very good. They made that animation of those guys writhing in pain, specifically grabbing their genitals. So the second they knew they gave people the ability to shoot a specific spot, they were like, well, this will probably be used on crotch first, and head. The shot in the head animation was probably the second animation they made as opposed to the crotch one.
That's right. Crotch first, ask questions later. It's not a bad name for a title. Let's see if we can end up using that at some point. Anyways, let's pitch some video games. I believe you're going first today.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. So, on a different and lighter note, today I want to pitch to you a game where a character a la Edith Finch, a la some of these narrative adventure games, discovers their grandmother's diary, and she went missing shortly after World War I. So you pick up this diary and you start reading passages, and you find through some transformative nature that you are able to kind of place yourself into these passages and somehow time travel and be either a character in these stories or a bystander in these stories. And you're trying to go through the diary, maybe in order, maybe not in order, to piece together where your grandmother ended up going or why she disappeared.
All right, we'll start the clock there. That's interesting. There's a game that has been in the news, the gaming news recently, called Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. And it's in the gaming news recently because it sold very, very few copies for how high profile an indie game it is. I don't want to make this sound like I'm making fun of them. Like, obviously this is a tragic thing when a really like high profile, really neat looking game doesn't end up finding the audience that it set out to find. Yeah. But it seems like a really interesting game all about kind of collecting stories as you roam across the nation, and then using those stories, telling them to other people as a way of solving puzzles and problems in their own lives, and giving them the kinds of narratives that they want to hear. And so I'm thinking this could be kind of a similar thing where you have this book full of stories and of memories and of locations and times and places, and you might be in this town that your grandmother lived in, and maybe each of these locations is referenced somewhere in the story, and there's some sort of a clue that this is where this story took place. You can notice, even though it's probably coming on 100 years now, everything would have broken down, everything would have been painted over, built over in this times. But if you're able to use the context clues as you explore this town to pick out which story goes to which location, then maybe kind of like, what is it? The Ethan Carter? Is that the
Vanishing of Ethan Carter?
Yes, Vanishing of Ethan Carter. How once you're able to kind of place each of those locations in the narrative, then you can kind of see it come alive in front of you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love the idea of maybe there's aspects of the narrative that are more of an audio experience, and you're trying to, track, almost like you get a museum tour where you're trying to track and find the location, almost as if there's a sense of urgency around that itself to show this kind of the I just missed it feeling, even though it happened a long time ago.
It would be interesting to have this kind of, almost like Her Story, a linear nonlinearity, where you can go to any of these locations at any time and you can place all of these pages out of order. But, obviously they are written in an order and they follow a chronological through line. Yeah. And as you are going through them, kind of like Gone Home does, you can maybe not bar off sections of the city until you solve previous puzzles, but maybe there are some puzzles and locations that lead to clues that you need to find other ones, so you can use that in a way to kind of gate off some of the later reveals, so you can kind of keep the story in order. But this idea of discovering it yourself and piecing it all together yourself and kind of making your own notes like Her Story is really effective.
One of the things that I thought might be interesting as a mechanic is somehow the ability to, whether it's through whatever real life is, whether it's through the character's current day context or some mechanic in the diary, to be able to switch characters or switch perspectives. Like, do you find multiple people's diaries and it's all playing Rashomon style, the same scene out?
Oh, interesting. I think it makes a lot of narrative sense to just have one diary that you're following, although maybe there's a way to pick up supporting documents. Like if you were to find a couple of other letters or something. I think it would be interesting to have like other guest individuals just for like 1 or 2 scenes rather than following the complete stories of like 5 people.
I love the idea. One of my favorite things, I guess this is a spoiler alert, but we do that occasionally on this show. One of my favorite things in Gone Home is that the sort of narrative switch of assuming that, I don't know, whether because it's a video game or the tone or however they designed that game, you assume dread for a good portion of that game of the fate of these characters, and to have it end on sort of a not so dreadful note was interesting. And I wonder if, this could end with finding out that your grandmother actually was very happy with why she's gone or she's missing, or she ended up pursuing this other thing, or maybe you're finding out that you are actually the descendant of, the second family that she started or something.
Maybe it ends with like a reconciliation with your old world family that you hadn't ever known before, and just like a moment of meeting between people that are still alive that are connected from this story.
Yeah, I think that that's really cool. One of the things that I think we should attempt to do is figure out a way to have the gameplay not just be the walking simulator stuff. And I don't know if that time travel mechanic, we can lean on that to do something.
If you're excavating things from the past, if you're wanting to find details of the story that are buried or painted over, then you can use some of these mechanics to move items around, or to maybe if you arrange the furniture in a room in a certain way, then it can kind of contextualize some of the elements. You can use contextual clues to say, okay, if the author was reading a book in the by the fireplace, then what would she have been seeing out the window that would have triggered this? And then that would kind of lead you on a path somewhere else. So I don't know if that's enough, but, a certain amount of knocking down walls or moving objects or mentally placing things in your mind even.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily lean on this as a crutch, but if you did introduce the idea of mental illness or the unreliable narrator, or maybe just a particularly eccentric grandmother who would maybe describe what she is seeing in a way that is unusual or much more like a riddle.
So that could make sense, especially if she's like very young.
Yeah, right, exactly. So to have that be fanciful in a way that left it up to you to interpret, or I think, placing things in a scene feels just right to me, or like the witness catching a certain sight line to make things show up, making things feel like you are seeing things as if you were her, if you trigger just the right set of circumstances.
Yeah. You know how a child will have invisible friends or favorite things to look at. If you look at it in the right direction, you can kind of see like, oh yeah, the stained glass window on this church does kind of look like a clown if you look at these specific portions of it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you could definitely make this ripe if you also set it in such a way that you are taking your grandmother's diary and bringing it to maybe a house that is empty or abandoned or you just bought, but maybe there's been other owners and they've changed it in a way. In the game, as the game progresses, you are kind of putting the house back to the way it was.
Yeah.
And then you could actually introduce some very interesting, it's almost strange to think about this, but maybe it makes sense to have house customization style stuff. Like you could paint a wall, or you could, restore a piece of furniture, like actually make it a little bit more mechanical. And then it's getting things in such a way, or placing them in such a way, or coloring them, or even just cleaning them to solve these puzzles.
It would be interesting to learn what it's like to actually restore like an old home that would have been through, if this is a European thing, like 2 significant world wars, and all the damage that can be done to that. And, it's, there's probably people out there, I don't know of this off the top of my head, but there's probably people out there that go to these old homes and restore them to how they would have looked at the time.
Yeah, my friend recently just bought a house and they were tearing up this awful linoleum and found really beautiful hardwood underneath that floor. And that feeling of, wow, there was something beautiful here. And for whatever reason, it became altered or buried. I think to create that moment and that feeling and then have it trigger, whether that's an interactive flashback or something of that ilk, could be a really interesting way to sort of showcase one of these more experiential type of games.
I like that. We're out of time, though. That's all that we have for that one. Does this one have a name?
I only penned a very rough name of Diary Traveler. I think that's very bad. So
do a diary hard.
That actually does not roll off the tongue well, does it?
No.
What if I don't know, what if we do something called like Next of Kin or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, or Chris, if you're setting up a series, you wanted to go on to do like, Diary B and C, you can start with Diary A. And that's there's no way that could possibly be misinterpreted.
Well,
I like Next of Kin. We can stick with that for now.
Well, I'll do Diary A under the condition that we ship it Capcom style, like Resident Evil 2, and you can play through Diary A, Diary B, and Diary C.
Or if we ship it Capcom style, like Resident Evil Revelations, and spell it wrong on the packaging.
Is that true?
Yes.
Oh, no.
On the 3DS version.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
They transpose the I and the T in Revelations.
Yikes. Capcom. Oh, my goodness.
That's all right. Let's go on to my pitch today. And what I'm doing is not necessarily a game as much as maybe like an art installation or like almost like a history lesson, like something you would see installed in a museum, maybe. Mm-hmm. It's like a top-down overhead walking simulator. Again, we're on a very low action bent today.
Well, that's good.
To go with your global ceasefire idea.
Yes.
And you're just kind of a man in a field with not a lot of defining features around you.
Okay.
In this big kind of open, almost empty world. And you're just walking. And as you walk, there are portions of the map that have different geography and different weather patterns, and they represent the different locations on the Earth, the continents, the different types of plants and animals and stuff that grow there. And the walking is like a metaphor for the passage of time over hundreds of years. And so as you walk, your person develops in the way that a society would develop, in the clothes that he wears and the tools that he has, and maybe riding a horse or driving a car, the types of weapons that he would have, and the types of interactions that he can have with the world. But it changes depending on what direction you walk into and what environments you encounter. And this is kind of going back to the sociological ideas like you would read in like Guns, Germs, and Steel, that the progression paths of various societies and the reasons that, societies in different parts of the world ended up on very different paths from one another is because they had to adapt to their individual surroundings, and that necessitated certain inventions from some of them and forced them into certain ways of life, developing irrigation, or if you live in a very arid environment that's not right by a river, maybe developing different types of hunting equipment depending on what animals are around. But it's a way of experiencing that. It would take maybe 10 minutes to play through the entire thing, and you can just kind of keep going through it and trying out different routes, or maybe circling back on your route and going back to where you were before and coming up with something, and just kind of seeing how that affects the progression of your character. So maybe there's not a lot to go on, but I'll start the clock there.
Am I physically transforming at all in your mind?
Yeah, in a way. I want to keep like the same shape, and so you're not growing older because this doesn't represent like a person's
your
life.
Personal time, yeah.
Yeah, but maybe the character, obviously the appearance of the character changes with the clothing and armor maybe that they would be wearing, depending on what what history their society represents. Skin color would change depending on the type of environment that they find themselves in, how close to the equator or how much sun versus how cold the environment is. Hair would change, just kind of all these things that you can kind of catch these micro evolutions over time.
I don't feel like this is a full playwright pitch until we get into the music aspect of this as well. Like,
that would be interesting.
Having the instruments grow in complexity or move around the arrangements. That's one of my favorite things in a civilization game, of playing the different civilizations and just kind of hearing the ambient music of each place, whether it's through the city selector or what have you.
What I'd love to learn is like why a certain type of music evolves in a certain society. Like, what is it about the environment or about the development of technologies brought a certain type of music into being? And maybe that's a little bit more complicated than we can really cover in this game, something that I want to keep relatively simple. So it's just very digestible. But I don't know if I want it to just be like, oh, here's the African drums to represent the African development path.
Sure.
Like I want it to have some sort of a intermixing and have some sort of an interaction with the development of the player character.
I know we're always trying to ideally pitch games around here, but in a way, I imagine this is like the world's coolest character creator. Does that make sense? Like being able to, whether there's sliders for, and maybe it's really base level things. It's like what animals were available in the region, right? Because suddenly if you have, these large animals that you can skin, that is what creates the society that would see drums as being a viable thing to create. And, likewise, I mean, I wish I understood better about cultural development around the world. Here I am displaying a little bit of ignorance there. But yeah, maybe, something as simple as climate and seeing what happens to your character as you go to these places. I'm trying to think of, I don't want to put the burden of figuring out what the action or interaction with the character is, other than experiencing the transforming sights and sounds. But I think having it linked to time is the most difficult aspect of this to me.
As you walk, time moves forward, and you can choose to either kind of buckle down in the location that you start at and watch maybe a little village kind of grow up around you, or maybe you choose to keep moving and become nomadic and see a caravan alongside of you, or pilgrims crossing the sea, or a group of perpetually moving people, or maybe you choose to settle down in the mountains and see a castle emerge in this harsh environment.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm trying to think of the name of the game, but I believe it is called Takeda or Takedo.
It doesn't sound familiar.
It's a board game. It is a board game in which you play as a character and you take turns, and on your turns, you are gathering experiences. And the point of the game is not like, oh, you took the best route or anything like that. Instead, the point of the video game, or the board game rather, is to have the most interesting life to you. So I love the idea of trying to create that, that experience of, one person's life, if they choose to travel, the things that are rewarding about that. Versus if they choose to stay in the right, in one place and invest in that. So it's Tokaido, Tokaido.
Interesting.
And you can see it's a very beautiful looking game, and people are just kind of following a path. And as they follow this path, they kind of flip over different cards and they find out about their own personal journey.
Are there winners and losers here?
I don't know. I actually own the game and have not played, which is terrible. But I bought the game entirely based on how great I thought the idea of that sounded. I think there must be some way to quantify what constitutes the most interesting life. It's you traveling one specific road in Japan where you meet people, taste meals, collect beautiful items. And so what if traveling in your pitch also could correspond to doing that, right? And now you could have a game that's simply about experience and achievement of like you get achievement points when you taste a dish that you never tasted before in a time period that you never had it, or you meet, perhaps you could meet a famous person throughout history and throughout a region, right? So if you do migrate enough, or if you do move to the correct places at the correct times, you're bound to bump into Aristotle. And it could just be a very simple basic model of this person, just to say that you met them. Although it would be great if in the future you could take selfies. But yeah, just about going to these places and saying I did this thing, and now all the players are saying, hey, did you find this person at this place? Like, oh, you didn't get there at the right time. Or although I wonder if that, if you have to advance time as you move, that means that you can't, it's very hard to get to or start at other places in the world earlier in time.
Maybe there are like alternate starting points as well. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Although I guess it makes the most sense if everyone starts in like the equivalent of Africa or the Middle East, because that's where life started.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it would be an intellectually honest experience to be migrating out from there.
Well, what would be cool about that too, right, is you had Pangea back in the day. So you could, at different time periods of the game, gate off sections of land by just having them split or whatever. So one playthrough, you're like, okay, well, I ended up in Eastern Europe. Here we go.
I think Pangea predated humanity, but
fair enough.
I don't have my numbers straight on that just yet.
Well, I mean, we're doing an illustrative version of the entirety of planet Earth. I think we could do some dinosaurs
you can
too,
take some
right?
liberties. Sure, why not? Now, one of the early pitches that I gave as well was a simulation of the development of like language and legend. Now, again, I want this to kind of be a wordless experience. I think it would just be kind of neat as something you would walk up to in a museum and just kind of experience for 10 minutes and then like, at least just give you some stuff to think about. But if in some ways you can kind of see, legends unfolding based on where you spent the most time. If you find yourself in like an agricultural society, then maybe it's, sun gods that become prominent, and then that kind of morphs into kind of modern day deities as you would see them in major religions. Or if you find yourself in a river valley, then maybe there's some sort of a river dragon that is worshipped, or at least stories are told about.
Well, another fun twist on that could potentially be something to the effect of you find yourself in the situation where you end up becoming worshipped as one of these gods, whether you traveled through a sea and got wet and then ended up in the right place at the right time and you're Poseidon all of a sudden. I always loved when Star Trek or when Doctor Who dabbles in when you can time travel, and any sufficient amount of technology, or you go to an underdeveloped society and, technology seems like magic, right? So, and then by extension, you are a god. So to have the traveler end up being a story, especially, share, part of your story just through wandering, just through collecting things, maybe is interwoven in each culture. And really the game is about, how cultures share a lot of myths or legends.
Anyways, that's all the time we have on that one. Speaking of time, the main theme of the game, we have to wrap that one up. I didn't come in with a name for this one, but let's see what I can come up with here. You can call it something very simple like chronology or history of man or the wall chart of modern history, the video game.
That's pretty cool.
I like that. Did you ever grow up with that book around? Like, I always feel like there was a wall chart of world history in every like home that I went to, but just nobody looked at it. But do you know what I'm talking about? It's like a large, like a huge book that kind of folds out into these poster size timelines of history with all sorts of major events drawn in kind of old timey map drawing style.
I've never seen one at any person I know's house. I think I've seen it at a school, or I've seen it
yeah.
And you know what is funny about that is, like, God knows how big the book would have to be at this point, because it contains a lot of details in it. But no, I think that would be cool. Wall chart of world history, the game, or the video game of world history.
Let's move on to our listener submission. This comes from Tyler Petty, who has submitted to our Playwright website. That is playwrightcast.com/pitch to go straight to the pitching portal, or you can just go to the .com and see an archive of all of our previous shows, as well as spaces to comment on them, and a great thing to show all of your friends if you want them to get into the creative spirit just like you. Anyways, this comes from Tyler Petty, who says, "My idea is to make the Turing test into an MMO. You'll begin by creating a character who will move into the city, I'm thinking Blade Runner atmosphere, and once you're settled in, your job is to figure out which of the other inhabitants are real, i.e. human users, and which are fake, NPCs. You can observe them, hang out in the city, and interview them. At the same time, though, everyone else is doing the same thing to you. You'll rank up in the game by correctly accusing and retiring NPC characters, and you'll lose points for incorrect accusations. Gain 1 point for correct guesses, lose 2 for incorrect. You can also gain points by getting other characters to accuse you of being a fake." We'll start the clock there.
This kind of reminded me a few episodes back when I was pitching the Blade Runner game, but the little twist there at the end, Tyler, the gaining points by convincing other people you're fake, is really interesting here. I think that could be very fun, and in a way, depending on what level of expression you have. I mean, I think you have to handle a lot of this through like actual typing and chat, I guess.
That's something that I was curious about, because, you know, if I'm thinking about multiplayer experiences, voice chat would pretty much be off the table, because you'd be able to tell who's real and who's not pretty easily.
That's true.
So maybe if there was some sort of like non-verbal way of communicating, like a Banjo-Kazooie noises, or little chirps like you would get in Journey, or just kind of mumbles that would represent the way that people speak instead of actually composing words.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that Journey reference, because one of the things that always struck me, as long as I'm spoiling video games for people, that struck me in Journey is that moment where you're saying, you know, to the other thing, the other character that's on screen with you, you go, is this real? Is this a person, or is this a computer? And then, like, I don't know if you felt that way too, but I also had the second, because you have such limited expression, I also had the second thought of, man, if this is AI, it is very strange. And in a way that, like, I've never quite seen AI be before. So I think if you mixed in a very limited set of expression with potentially, let's say, I don't know if it could be just applied to anything, but we're in fantasy land here on Playwright, so we will. The Xbox Forza Drivatar technology. Now, for people that don't know, the Drivatar in Forza, it analyzes not only just how you drive in general, but every way, every turn, every brake, every acceleration around every corner of every track. And technically, that's enough data to make a pretty close approximation to you as a driver. So I wonder if, like a Turing test, or like artificial intelligence, as more players play this game and feed it more points of behavioral data, if it's actually naturally going to become a tougher and tougher game, until eventually people who are coming to this thing late are going to be like, I really can't tell the difference between the players and the computers.
That's why there has to be some interesting way of interaction. Maybe if you're able to point and react to things, express emotions, then you can use those to kind of elicit different responses. If you point to a particular part in the environment and, that elicits an emotion from somebody, then you can tell, oh, that's not a scary thing that I pointed out. They're reacting like that, and that's kind of suspicious and weird. I think if everyone's trying to make everyone else believe that they're fake, that does make it difficult because then you're trying to throw people off your trail. And so for it to feel like a genuine interaction, to feel like a real Turing test, I feel like both have to be trying really hard to prove that they're real.
Yeah, it's almost like you're going to create an environment where everybody's always trying to prove their own identity. How do you make it fun to trick someone or potentially get them to guess wrong? And in a way that it won't just be, I don't know, copying and pasting what the computers in the game are doing.
Yeah, maybe everybody has a day job as well that they have to perform, to make a rent so that they can afford to do their private eye work on the side. And so, you have tasks that you have to complete, and you have maybe missions that you have to go on, things that you can do to progress your own personal narrative. But this is all kind of in service of doing this Blade Runner type work. And so everyone has something to do, and everyone's also watching everybody else at the same time. So it's not just people standing around in a circle waiting for somebody to act weird.
Now, I know the concept of the Turing test, but is the Turing test actually like a series of questions?
I don't think so. I think it just refers to any test that you would give a machine. If the responses are indistinguishable from what a human would give, then it has successfully passed the Turing test. It can pass off as a human being.
That's interesting. So if somebody knows what questions to elicit a human response, maybe in this mini game or this day job or something, you're working alongside people, and it's actually through the task of the day job where you're starting to be able to pinpoint who you think might actually be a robot versus who's just really good at their day job, especially if it's like, really dystopian factory floor, repetitive mini game sort of job stuff.
And then the moral of the story is, of course, in those menial labor jobs, we are all robots.
And we've all been replaced by robots. So there you go.
That would be an interesting perspective, is like over the course of the game, as like every 10 hours, it cycles out actual human players and replaces everybody with robots.
One of the interesting things that Tyler talks about here is you rank up by accusing and, in quotes, retiring NPC characters. So there must have to be almost World of Warcraft style, I imagine, I challenged you to a duel, and the other person accepting or declining it. Right?
Or just Blade Runner style, if you feel you've got a bad feeling about someone, you just pull out your gun and start blasting.
But I mean, one of the reasons why I suggested the duel system is I think it would be interesting if, some computers could just accept you in a duel, and even if they ran away and it was this big long hunt and you travel across the whole map to track them down, and then you end up killing them and losing 2 points. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching feeling of that, of not just being wrong, but perhaps even the computer does tricks to you, like it denies your duel request at first, and then
what
it
does
accepts.
that look like, though? That would be like denying a request for arresting you.
Right. Well, that's true. So the real question is like, would a real person choose to lose one of their bodies or clones or whatever these are, their NPC, their body, their physical being, in order to throw you off the trail? Although, no, wait a minute. Destroying another player,
that loses you points if you destroy another player.
Points. Okay, so I love the idea of a human player potentially like allowing you to kill them because they know it's going to cost you points, and then you having to make the decision of, I'm done with this. Like, I guess you're right. Maybe the more organic pursuit system of deciding when, but I feel like it's almost like two modes of play. Like, is the whole world also a battleground?
If we're going to pull in another playwright cliche, if we were to set this in a VR world and have it all be motion tracked, then you can drive these bots into having fairly believable motion captured based on, user information, movements, and people could be waving to each other and trying to prove that they're real by reacting to gestures that you give them through your actual physical body motion. And if you feel like you got a bad feeling about somebody, you just reach down onto your hip holster, pull out your gun, and shoot them right in the head and see if you win or lose. But if you make the wrong call, then that's on you. And if you go into the negatives, then maybe your character is out of the game or something like that.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to create that. Also, the users having to submit feedback about other users. He has here talking about you can gain points by getting other characters to just accuse you of being fake. So, like, how am I rewarded for that? But regardless, I'm so happy that as we approach the 1 year mark on this show, that we are talking about our tropes that we ourselves have created in this show.
Written ourselves into corners. Well, we're out of time there. Thank you very much for that one, Tyler Petty. We have to come up with a name there. I think Turing is right in the open there, but there is already a game called the Turing Test, so that doesn't help us.
What if we did? What if we
go
World
of Turkcraft?
It
doesn't necessarily send the best image.
What if we zig when everyone else zags and call it like Alan's World or something like that, where we're referencing the earlier part of the name?
Okay.
Alan's Land? Is land cooler than world in that?
It depends on if this is the Game Boy or the Super Nintendo version.
Okay, fair enough. Super Alan's World.
That's an unusual name, and that's not what I would expect from it, but I'll go with that. All right, Super Alan's World. Anyways, that came from our community. As we said before, you can go over to playwright.com/pitch to pitch us your idea. You can alternatively tweet us at playwrightcast or email us playwrightcast@gmail.com, and we will read that on an upcoming show. That is PLAYWRITECAST.
This is the part in the show where we thank PROTODOME for the use of our theme song, Hello World, from the album Blue Noise. It's a very good song, and when you're done listening to it, you can actually go to playwrightcast.com and check out this episode's post. We're going to have the John Woo crotch shot montage on there. We're going to link to...
What a treat.
Yeah, I'll link to the video game ceasefire thing, and I'll probably be tweeting about it too. But if you want, on April 28th, stream a game that is gun free, share it with the world. I will try and host your stream or tweet it out at other people. I don't have many followers. It's not going to make a huge difference, but hey, one gamer at a time. Maybe we can be sensitive to other people.
I think it'd be really cool to get like an entire Overwatch server that just chooses to use emotes for a match.
That would be so cool. I mean, can you imagine a PUBG match where everyone just stays naked the whole time? And there's so many fun, crazy things we can do that aren't, firing a gun.
Yeah, that's right. There's always the old trusty Hadoken.
That's right.
Anyways,
and that's allowed.
Why don't you take us out with a miniature idea for the end of the show?
So my mini idea this week is one I might develop on another episode, but it is the management and creation of a candy factory.
I love it. All right. And this is like fanciful, right?
Yes,
like Willy
absolutely.
Wonka style.
Willy Wonka for sure.
Very good. Not the cold industrial belts.
No, but you can imagine if I really ever pitch it, we're going to get to traps and tours and all that sort of stuff.
I like to think that they are intentional traps.
Yes, of
Anyways,
course.
we're getting into way too much conversation here. Thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Bye.